your clientele, just feel free to ask away. If there's a hurdle, a hiccup that you've had on a previous transaction with regard to an exchange, just let me know, and I'd be happy to address those things kind of as we go along. It's probably a pretty good time to get a little brush up on 1031 exchange activity, because even with COVID, with the coronavirus, with the rioting, the looting, all the unrest that's going on right now, there's still quite a bit of investor activity out there in the marketplace. When California kind of went under stay-at-home orders about midway through March, a lot of us kind of were like looking around at each other like, well, what the hell do we do now? How are we going to get deals done? And one of the great things about clients that are working in the 1031 exchange space is that these clients that are doing exchanges, they are solely investors. So they're really looking at real estate predominantly from an analytics standpoint. So it kind of takes the emotion out of real estate. I know we all love that emotion when you help out a first-time home buyer, they get their first house, or they're looking to upgrade, or they're looking for that dream retirement home. But when it comes to 1031 exchanges, we're solely dealing with clients predominantly from a dollars and cents kind of perspective. So, for our clients that were in 1031 exchanges that were selling an investment property, even with COVID, the great thing is they were really looking at real estate from an analytics. They weren't getting tripped up on whether there was a man cave, what the travertine was like, what school district it was like, or where the property was located. Because really what our investors are looking for is the property going to cash flow, and is the property in an area that's going to appreciate in property value? So those are generally the number one and number two reasons why I find that people utilize 1031 exchanges. It's for the ability to get out from underneath an underperforming real estate asset and get into that next bigger, better performing asset. So with that being said, I am going to pop up a little PowerPoint here. I'm going to share my screen here with you guys. And again, if anybody has questions, feel free. You can either use the chat box, or you can just kind of pop on. I don't care if you guys unmute yourself and ask a question. Here's just all of our contact information if you need it. But when I sit down and I talk to clients about exchanges, one of the first things that I key in on is the term investment, because you guys would probably be shocked at how many people call me up and they say, hey, Steve, I'm selling my primary residence and I want to do a 1031 exchange with it. Or I own a second home and I want to know if I can exchange that. I live half the year in Denver. I live half the year here in Southern California. And when the snow comes in Denver, I relocate down to Southern California for 6-7 months. Unfortunately, primary residences and second homes will really never qualify for a 1031, but just about everything else will. So the IRS, they've got this kind of unique set of terms that they like to use. You guys have probably heard the term like kind, but there's a lot of confusion amongst our principals as to what is considered like kind real estate. So, I hear it all the time from clients. They think, all right, if I'm selling a triplex, I've got to scour San Diego County for one of the 3 triplexes that's currently on the market and successfully take down that property because I have to buy something that's like kind to what I sold. It's actually absolutely incorrect. The IRS could care less about what the property type is. They care about how the property is being held. Has that property been held for investment purposes or in the use of your business or trade? So everything that you see on the left side of your screen here, the single family homes, the vacant land, the multifamily, the industrial, the office, etc., all of that sort of our traditional real estate. And one of the beautiful things about exchanges is the ability to switch these property types. I'm in my office today. If I know the owner of this office building and they want to sell this thing for $30 million, they could actually exchange out of this $30 million office building and get into $30 million worth of single family rentals. So if I wanted to sell this for $30 million, go out and buy $31 million single family homes, I could actually do that through an exchange. So you can go from commercial to residential or vice versa. A lot of times I'll hear from clients, they say, hey, Steve, I'm sick of getting phone calls at 2 a.m. of somebody's water heater that's exploded, somebody's toilet's overflowed. I'm sick of the 3 T's, the toilets, the trash, the tenants. A lot of times the tenants are also the trash. So they'll say, you know what, Steve, I want to sell my duplex or my triplex. I don't know the first thing about commercial real estate, but I want to give it a shot. Can I get into a triple net retail property? Absolutely, yes. So if you want to sell your residential and get into commercial, perfectly fine. And you can also mix and match the states. You're not just limited to staying in California. So if you want to sell your property here in Southern California and you've always wanted to own a blueberry farm in Maine, you can actually do that through an exchange. You can buy and sell anywhere within the 50 United States. And there are actually 2 U.S. territories, Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands, that you can buy and sell as well. Now, everything that you see on the right side of your screen, these are kind of the things that are a bit outside of the box. Sometimes our clients, they call us and they say, you know what, I'm really sick of the 3 T's and I don't trust commercial, or I don't know anything about commercial real estate. Is there anything else that I can exchange it out of? Well, everything that you see on the right side of your screen is actually considered real estate from a tax perspective. So if you wanted to sell your single family rental and you're really into wind energy, you want to go out and buy a bunch of windmills out, in Palm Springs, you can do that through exchange. Cell towers, billboards, air rights, boat docks and moorings. I didn't even know what the hell a mooring was until I had a client that said, hey, Steve, I want to sell my mooring off of Catalina Island and I want to exchange it for a single family home. I said, well, what the hell's a mooring? He said, you know, that little stick that's in the water, that buoy that's in the water that you attach your boat to make sure it doesn't go floating out to sea. I said, yeah, is that worth something? Sold it for $350,000 and he wanted to put it into a rental home. So if you want to sell your stick in the water for $350,000 and go buy a rental home, you are welcome to do so through a 1031 exchange. Now, the reason I'm telling you all these things is not because I realistically think you're going to have clients that are chomping out the bit to, go buy cemetery plots or solar farms or whatnot, but it's more so just to illustrate the diversity of 1031. Our clients, they tend to get really myopic. They think if I sold industrial, I've got to buy industrial. If I sold vacant land, I've got to buy vacant land. Absolutely not true. Now, quick little tip for you guys that are real estate agents. If you're looking for an additional way to farm for investors, I would highly recommend, talk to Josh, talk to Briana, put together a farm package targeting vacant land. Vacant residential lots can be exchanged for income producing property. I hear it from people all the time. Hey, Steve, I bought a piece of dirt in the middle of nowhere 20 years ago. I thought it was going to be in the path of growth, or I had plans to eventually develop it, but in the meantime, I haven't gotten around to it. But I've been paying property taxes on that thing for 20 years. I haven't been able to depreciate it, and I get zero income off it. Well, you can exchange that piece of dirt and go into income producing property. So that is perfectly fine. And those guys can put together a farm package, target those pieces of vacant residential lots. They can also target things like out-of-state owners. Generally, people want to be within driving distance of their investment real estate. Non-owner occupied properties. I would target non-owner occupied properties that have been held for more than 27 years. Because if you own the property for more than 27 years, it is now fully depreciated, meaning you no longer get a depreciation deduction on your taxes, which is cutting into the bottom line of what you're putting in your pocket every year. So those guys can help you kind of really focus on, who to mail to, who to door knock on, that would be, kind of prime targets for exchange clients, for people that are going to be likely to be motivated to sell and get into the next better performing asset. Now, when I talk to a client, generally the first thing that I will ask them is, well, why are you even considering a 1031? And probably 99% of the time, they tell me they want to do an exchange because they don't want to pay taxes. And I always kind of challenge my clients on that. I say, that's not really true. If you didn't want to pay taxes, you just don't sell your real estate. So what's the real reason behind why you're selling your real estate? And then you come to find that it's generally a cash flow issue, an appreciation issue, no more depreciation deduction. Maybe it's fully amortized. Maybe they want to diversify, et cetera. But since our clients are so consumed with the taxes, it seems like taxes and 1031 kind of go hand in hand. These are the tax rates that you could expect to pay if you just decided to sell your investment property, cash out, and walk. So if you sold your investment real estate, there's 3, possibly even 4 taxes that you could expect to pay. So right off the bat, the first one on the list is long-term capital gains tax. Anytime you've held an investment property for more than a year, you're going to pay capital gains tax rate at a rate of either 15 or 20% of your gain. Now, you don't get into that higher rate of 20% until you make a lot of money. If you're single, it's a threshold of making more than $441,000 a year. If you're married, it's $496,000 or more. But just by selling your piece of real estate, you might be putting yourself into one of those higher tax brackets. So just as an example, let's say I'm a dentist and last year I made $200,000 at my job as a dentist. And now I'm selling a rental property in North Park and I have a $300,000 gain on that property. Well, I made $200,000 as a dentist. I made $300,000 from my sale of my investment real estate. I made $500,000. I am now in that higher tax bracket of 20%.
Come down here. I'm watching a video webinar. Why? Sure, I'd love to. Where do you want me to come?
I'll let you guys handle it.
Someone's unmuted. Mute yourself. Josh, if you can mute her.
I thought we had our first brave soul asking a question, but I'll just keep rambling here. So if that's not a bad enough kick in the teeth, then we get to the state. So there are actually 41 states in the United States that have some level of state income tax. For those of you guys that work with a lot of investors, you may have seen a lot of your clients moving out of state. They're going into Nevada, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, Washington, the income tax states. Well, we here in California have the misfortune of living in the state with the highest ordinary income tax of any state in the country. So if you sell your investment real estate here and you cash out, if you don't exchange, the state could take a rate as high as 13.3% of your gain and put it in their pocket. So, Uncle Gavin will take, Uncle Sam will take upwards of 20%. Uncle Gavin could take as high as 13.3% of your gain. Then there's a healthcare surtax that kicks in for most of our investors. And what the hell does healthcare have to do with real estate? I don't have any idea. But when healthcare was reformed in 2012, we had to find a way to pay for that reform. So they decided to tax investment real estate. So you could be giving another 3.8% of your gain back to the government in the form of a healthcare tax. And then last but not least is the kicker, the one that everybody always forgets about, depreciation recapture. Anytime that you own investment real estate, unless you own vacant land, because you cannot depreciate vacant land. But if you own a single family home, a condo, a townhouse, an apartment building, an industrial building, an office building, whatever, you should be depreciating that property on your tax return every single year. Well, if you fail to do an exchange, if you just decide, I'm going to cash out, bite the bullet, pay the taxes, and walk, the government comes back and they say, hey, you know all that depreciation that you took on this property for the last 15 years that you owned it? I now want 25% of that depreciation back. So the very long story short, if you guys couldn't tell by now, I'm super long-winded, but when you combine all of these rates, the Fed, the state, the healthcare, the depreciation, if you just cash out, you're probably on the low end in California going to give 30% of your gain back to the government. And on the high end, it can be upwards of 41% of your overall gain going back to the government in some form of tax or another. So a lot of people look at 1031 exchanges as almost like a tax-free loan. The government's saying, here, look, I'll let you keep this 30 to 40% as long as you stimulate the real estate market. So for example, in order to not pay any of these taxes, if you sell a property, an investment property for $1 million, the IRS wants you to buy at $1 million or more.
What?
To do that, you get to defer paying all of these taxes. Now, if you decide to buy down in value, which you can also do in an exchange, you could sell for $1 million and buy something for $900. You will be paying taxes on a percentage of the $100,000 that's left over at the end of the exchange. So just be aware these are the tax rates. Now, one quick side note for those of us here in California, California is getting super aggressive. In fact, California, Oregon, and Wisconsin are now actually tracking us when our money leaves the state. So as I mentioned earlier, you can exchange out of California, no problem with that at all. But California doesn't like to see your tax dollars go. So what California started doing at the beginning of 2014 is they implemented what's called a clawback provision, which basically says if you exchange out of state, you still have to file a tax return with California showing us that you still own that property that you bought in Texas, right? Because if one day you decide to sell that property in Texas and you stop exchanging, you cash out, California comes back and says, hey, remember that property you sold in San Diego back in 2020? You now owe your back state ordinary income taxes. So those three states, California, Oregon, and Wisconsin, now actively track us when we leave the state. Believe it or not, there's three states that are actually worse. Pennsylvania, Georgia, Maryland, they actually collect their state tax dollars at the door. So you can exchange out of state, but you can't take your state tax with you. You can defer the federal taxes and the depreciation recapture and that healthcare tax, but they collect their state tax at the door. So just something to be aware of. Now, I would actually argue that the non-tax benefits are the real reason why people utilize exchanges. As we already talked about, most people are exchanging because they want to increase cash flow or they want to be in an area of greater appreciation in property value. But sometimes people want to diversify their real estate portfolio or even consolidate. They want to get their eggs out of this one basket and they want to put it into 2 or 3 different baskets. Perfectly fine. If I want to sell for $1 million and go buy 3 properties that are $400,000 a piece, I can definitely do that. So I can diversify my risk. Or I could do the opposite. I could consolidate my real estate portfolio. Right now I'm working with a client that's selling 6 single family homes He's sick of door knocking at the beginning of each month, collecting rent checks from clients that may or may not be able to pay the rent. And he said, Steve, I'm incurring so much brain damage as a result of this. I just want to sell these 6 single-family homes, pool the money, and buy one triple net retail property, something that's easy to manage. Can I do that? Absolutely. You can sell, consolidate, buy that one bigger, better performing asset. Sometimes people want to be closer to home. Sometimes it's cash flow. Sometimes there's a whole myriad of reasons why people exchange. The last one on this list here, estate planning, that's a huge reason why people exchange. I probably should move that bullet point to the top of the list because a lot of our clients will utilize a strategy of what we call swap till you drop. So exchange until you drop dead, which is actually brilliant. I don't ever want any of my clients to die, but everybody on this call is going to have clients that will eventually pass away, right? You've got friends, family, clients, et cetera, that own real estate. If they hold on to their real estate or if they exchange their real estate until the day they die, all of their back accumulated taxes die with them. So for example, my family got out to the West Coast through the Navy. My dad's from New York. During the Vietnam War, dad was stationed down in Coronado, bought himself a little condo right on Orange Avenue, paid maybe 35 grand for that condo. Today, the condo is worth about $1 million. Every now and then, my father selfishly threatens to sell Coronado and cash out, at which point I selfishly threaten his life. Because if my dad sells, cashes out, and pays his taxes, after taxes, he's no longer left with $1 million. He would be left with about $600,000. Whereas if my father holds on to his property or exchanges his property until the day he dies, when he passes away, all of those back accumulated taxes disappear with him. So if God forbid my father died today, and yes, he does know that I kill him in all of my presentations, he kind of gets a kick out of it. It's like his sick way of being involved in these things. But if Dave Decker passed away today and the property in Coronado is worth $1 million and I inherit it, my basis is now $1 million, today's fair market value. So if I hire one of you guys to help me sell that condo for $1 million, I would pay 0 tax. I would have no back capital gains tax, California ordinary income tax, depreciation, recapture to pay. All of it disappears upon death. So a lot of our clients will use exchanges for estate planning. Great way to set up the kids, the grandkids, the nieces and nephews, et cetera, for the future. Now, there are 2 major timelines that you have to stick to anytime that you do an exchange, and contrary to our clients' popular belief, these time periods are not particularly flexible. So from the time that you close the property that you're selling, the IRS gives you 45 calendar days to identify property that you want to buy, and they give you 180 calendar days to actually close on whatever it is that you'll be purchasing in the exchange. So for example, if I close escrow on July 1st, I've got 45 days from July 1st to identify, 180 days from July 1st to actually close on one or more of the properties that I have identified in my exchange. Unfortunately, if your 45th or 180th day falls on a weekend, a holiday, your birthday, Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, etc., it does not push until the next business day. The IRS unfortunately does not care, so we can't care either. So there's really no flexibility with regard to those time periods. Now, when I say that you have to identify property, typically you will identify your replacement property to us, the 1031 exchange accommodator. Anytime that you do an exchange, we are a necessary evil. I don't like to think of us as evil. I'd like to think of us as actually pretty helpful, but you have to involve a qualified intermediary or exchange accommodator. They're synonyms for the same thing anytime that your client wants to participate in a 1031. So we have to become involved in the transaction prior to the close of escrow of the property that's being sold. So you'll open escrow just like you would on any other real estate transaction. You call me up, I get everything teed up for your client. Escrow closes, and then the clock starts ticking. Now, during that 45 days, your clients will identify typically their top 3 choices. As you can see here, there are 3 different rules under which you can identify property. The most commonly used rule is the top one on the list, the 3 property rule. Under that rule, you can identify Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C, and the IRS does not cap the value whatsoever. So this is the most commonly used method of identification. But sometimes our clients want to diversify a lot. They'll sell a big property like this one that I'm currently in, and they'll want to go out and buy 5, 6, 7 smaller properties. In that case, you will want to use what's called the 200% rule. Under this 200% rule, you can diversify your portfolio. You can identify 4 or more properties, but then the IRS caps the value of all those properties. So going back to the example of this office building, let's say this thing is worth $30 million. I take the sales price of this property and I multiply it times 2. So if I'm multiplying 30 million times 2, I could identify up to $60 million worth of real estate, however that's comprised. All right, the last rule on the list, I'm not even going to bother going into. I've been in the exchange industry for 17 years. I've probably seen 5 people try it. All 5 have failed. It is completely asinine, really shouldn't even be in the tax code because you actually have to buy at least 95% of what you identify. So not a very realistic option. Now, the only time that the IRS ever extends these time periods is in 2 extremely rare circumstances. Either in the case of military deployment, here in San Diego, we are in a military town. So maybe you're working with a client that's in the military, they've sold a property that's involved in an exchange, and then they get deployed. They would receive an extension until after they returned home to complete their exchange. Or in the case of a federally declared disaster. Historically, federally declared disasters were things like earthquakes, fires, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, acts of terrorism. Up until April 9th of this year, the IRS had never issued a disaster relief extension as a result of a pandemic or a virus. But on April 9th, the IRS did in fact issue COVID-19 or coronavirus extensions. So just as a quick heads up, these extensions, they really only help out our clients that were already involved in exchanges. If you have a client that closes today, realistically, they're not going to be able to take advantage of this coronavirus extension. Frankly, the extension that the IRS gave was kind of piss poor, excuse my language, but the extension that they gave really didn't go nearly as far as any other disaster relief extension that they had ever given. Now, historically, disaster relief extensions for exchange clients really only dates back to the year 2005. So there's only about 15 years of history of disaster relief, but pretty much every disaster relief extension that the IRS had ever issued gave an additional 120 days to both the 45-day ID period and the 180-day closing period. So there were some definitive pros and cons that came with this extension. It was totally unprecedented. Now, we have actually gone to the Internal Revenue Service and to the U.S. Treasury and asked for further extensions to these time periods. But as of yet, the Internal Revenue Service and the Treasury has said, you know what, we're just going to keep things kind of as is. The more that I start to see more and more states opening up, I mean, Arizona's wide open now, Colorado's wide open, Florida, Georgia, et cetera. Even here in California, we're already at stage 3 of opening back up. The more states open up, the less likely I think it is that the IRS will issue further extensions. So prior to April 9th, the number one question that I was getting from clients was, is there going to be an extension? What's it going to look like? Post that, we started seeing some different topics come up as a result of coronavirus. We're starting to see a lot of people asking about reverse exchanges and a lot of people asking about seller financing. So I'm going to hit on these topics really quickly. We've only got a few minutes left here, but reverse exchanges are a pretty hot topic right now. What a reverse exchange does is it allows your client to go out and buy first and then sell second. Probably 99% of the time, our clients need to sell this building that they're currently in order to be able to afford the next property that they're going to buy. But due to the coronavirus, a lot of our clients are starting to look at other options. They're starting to go out and try to acquire their replacement property first. That is totally allowable under the IRS's guidelines. In the year 2000, the IRS officially put its stamp of approval on reverse exchanges where you buy first, sell second. It is a significantly more complex type of transaction. However, we do have an entire division that is solely devoted to reverse exchanges. It's a far more expensive option because in a reverse exchange, we as the accommodator actually have to go on title to one of the properties involved in the transaction. The IRS won't allow what's called simultaneous title. So your principal, your client, would not be able to be on title to the one they're buying and the one they're selling at the same time. So the exchange accommodator has to go on title to one of the properties involved until the other property can get sold. So significantly more complex. And then seller financing is coming up quite a bit due to lending issues. It's tougher to get a loan on the property that you want to buy in the exchange. If you are the buyer in a 1031 exchange and you are going to take out seller financing, if the seller is going to float you a note in order to be able to afford to close on that property, perfectly fine, no issues whatsoever. But if I'm the seller in a 1031 exchange, and I'm going to lend money to the buyer of my property, and I am the one doing the exchange, that can cause some pretty significant adverse tax consequences. So just for example, let's say I own a building that's worth $1 million and I'm selling it to Briana. And Briana comes to me and says, hey, Steve, I've got 800 grand right now. I'm going to give you that at the closing. Will you loan me 200,000 of your equity to buy your property? And, I'll pay you 6% interest for the next 5 years. I might say, hey, look, that's a great term. I don't mind doing that. But by me doing that, I'm not taking all of the equity from the property that I sold and putting it into the property that I'm purchasing, which means on that 200 grand that I loaned to Briana, I could be causing myself to have adverse tax consequences. So I may have what's called taxable boot on that 200 grand. So if seller financing is something that's coming up on one of your deals, feel free, give me a shout. I'm happy to help walk and talk you guys through that process. Now, one other thing, and this is kind of where I'll wrap it up, and then we'll open it up into some Q&A. But the number one question that I've been getting after April 9th is, what the hell are you guys doing with our money? So what you guys probably don't realize is that when you do a 1031 exchange and you have an accommodator like us, we have to hold your client's money in between the time they sell property A and they go out and buy property B. Well, the IRS actually has zero federal regulation on who can or cannot be an accommodator. So every time the real estate market starts going up and up and up and up and up, we start to see more independent exchange accommodators coming into the business. There's no licensing requirements. There's no bond or insurance requirements. There's no continuing education requirements. So you need to make sure that you ask lots of questions of who is handling your 1031 exchange, because during the last downturn, the last real estate recession, the dark years of 2008, 9, 10, 11, there was over $2 billion of clients' money that was lost or stolen as a result of exchange accommodators doing things with clients' money that they should not have been doing. On your screen here, you can see 4 of the most egregious examples of where things went a little bit wrong, or in some cases, a lot of it wrong. So make sure you're asking lots of questions as to who's working on your 1031 exchange. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, we are owned by Lawyers Title. We're a part of the same parent company. We're actually owned by the largest provider of title insurance services in the entire world. Bigger doesn't always mean better. I completely understand that. But what we have that no one else has, we have the largest financial strength and security of funds of anybody in the business whatsoever. So you want to ask lots of questions. What's your bond and insurance look like? Who are you owned by? What are you doing with my money? Are you commingling my funds? Or do I have a segregated bank account for my money? What banks are you depositing my funds with? Because as we saw during 08, 9, 10, 11, there were a lot of banks that were seized by the FDIC. So as the stock market is going like this, there's a lot of financial unrest out there, a market imbalance. A lot of our clients are starting to come to us with those kind of hard-hitting questions. What are you doing with my money? Who are you owned by? Et cetera. So make sure that you guys educate yourselves on who you're working with from a 1031 perspective. And we're here to help address those questions, those concerns. Josh and Briana can help put together those farm packages, help you really pinpoint and target a set of clientele that you can really market to. I'll kind of open it up to questions. Josh, Briana, I don't know if you guys have things that you want to add. I think there is 1 or 2 questions in the chat box that I went over.
That was great. We have about 3 minutes left, so maybe if you can put your email in the chat box.
Sure.
So if anyone has any questions, because I don't think we're going to have enough time for Q&A. If anyone has questions, they can just email you directly.
Sure. Yeah, and all of our cumulative contact information is on the screen here. So just let us know what we need. We're happy to help kind of walk and talk you through things, guide your clients through the process. 1031 exchanges don't have to be super technical. They are a bit confusing, but that's what you've got us for. I mean, we can help, really kind of settle their fears, quell their fears, and let them know this is really just a quick, simple process. The number one reason why I find that exchanges fail, just to be blunt with you, is laziness on the part of the principal. So for you guys as real estate agents, you really just need to stay on top of your clients and manage their expectations. Remind them this is not a property that you have to live in. This is the property that, that's going to cash flow for you in retirement. This is the property that's going to appreciate in value in retirement. So, just let me know what you guys need, and we'll help you out. So, and thank you for.
We have about less than a minute left, so appreciate everyone jumping on. And we do have this recorded, so if you want it, feel free to email Briana, me, or Steven, and we'll get that over to you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks a lot, guys. We appreciate it.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.